Hi there. I thought I'd make this video because, well, as an independent author, it's important for me that I read the works of other independent authors. I think it's really important to talk about independent writers, independent authors, because they are just as valid as an author who's been published by a traditional publisher. And of course, it's a lot harder for an independent author to get their book into a bookshop. I've recently managed a little bit of success with this, getting my book into some bookshops here in Melbourne, but it's not easy for independent authors to get their books out there and be read by people because, for the most part, independent authors have to promote themselves. Most independent books usually go unnoticed. Maybe they make a couple of sales because you've got some friends and family who wanted to buy it to support you as an independent author, but this is the case for most independent books, but not all of them. Not all, of course. Independent books can, from time to time, hit international markets. We've seen independent books that get taken on by a traditional publisher and republished. We've seen independent books get adapted into film. So being an independent author is legitimate, which is why I wanted to say a few things on independent publishing. I've noticed that some people are really hesitant to support independent authors because they don't see them as legitimate as traditional authors. But most independent authors that I know have gone through the same rigorous editing structures and stages that a traditional published book will go to. The only difference really is that they don't have the funding, they don't have a large team working on it. It might only be 2 or 3 people or even just one person. And so the way I see it, it's pretty awesome that people can accomplish things like this without the help of a traditional publisher. Maybe someday that's something that they seek, but at the time it's not something that they're going for. And you really have to admire that in a creator, in an artist, because it takes a lot of courage to do something like that. And one thing worth mentioning is that I don't really like the term self-publishing. I think there's a bit of a stigma surrounding it, and I'm all for, reclaiming, words that have stigmas around them, but I think independent publishing sounds quite professional, and it's what I choose to use, so. But I've noticed that some people are hesitant to support independent authors when their book is available on platforms like Amazon. Now, I know, of course, there are plenty of issues with Amazon. I have my own thoughts and feelings on this as well. Pretty strong ones, actually. And I personally don't typically buy off Amazon, but when it comes to independent authors, I of course make an exception because this may be the only place that an author is actually able to sell their works. I know for me, I'm really interested in trying to set up some kind of online store so I can distribute copies of my book myself, but this is going to be a very expensive endeavor because postage and delivery is not cheap, and more than likely I will make a loss doing this, as opposed to having a platform like Amazon, which not only sources and prints our books, but gets them to you. And for an independent author, it is, for me at least, the easiest way to get my work out there. So, a bit of a PSA that people who boycott Amazon and won't support an independent author because they are, hesitant to or refusing to make a purchase using Amazon, I can guarantee half of the furniture in your house probably comes from Amazon. And sure, boycott it for clothes and everyday products and so on and so forth, whatever, but when it comes to independent authors, Amazon has a monopoly on independent publishing through platforms like KDP and Ingram Spark. These are some of the best options for independent authors, and so by boycotting Amazon, you are harming the author and not Amazon. But I don't want to ramble too much about that because I also wanted to bring up independent publishing houses. Of course, not all independently published books are published by just an author. Some of them are published by small presses and independent publishing houses. And this, of course, is slightly different from publishing just on your own. And these independent publishing houses may have better access to bookshops and so on compared to an author, but it is still independent publishing, and small presses and indie authors, they need our support, so we should be supporting them as much as we can, I think. Which brings me to the point of this video. I wanted to talk about all of the books that I read in February. So for the month of February, I only read independent books, and I think I managed to get through seven? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. I can't count apparently. 7 independently published books. Most of them were poetry collections, because you do find that a lot of independently published books are poetry collections, which is fine for me because I do happen to be a poet and I do happen to like reading poetry. But most of the time I'm used to reading some of my favorite poets, like Leonard Cohen, Allen Ginsberg, Anya Wallwitz, John Cooper Clarke. Actually, I've got some of them just here. Some of my favorite poetry collections just over there. So I just wanted to break down as quickly as I could all of the books that I read this month, starting with On Sun Swallowing by Dakota Warren. This book was beautiful, very beautiful. I mean, the artwork is some of the typography in the artwork was phenomenal. It was published by Pure Nowhere, an indie press. Dakota Warren's writing is obviously really, really elegant. It's full of debauchery, it's full of romanticism, it's full of sugar and spice, and I think it is a really beautiful collection overall. This next collection is Pleasure by Finn O'Brien. Pleasure is a bit of a photo book, really. It's a hardcover. I think it's really aesthetically pleasing. The pages were like photo paper, which I thought was really interesting. And most of the poems, they're short, they're sweet, definitely the kind of poetry I find myself seeing on Instagram or Tumblr, but really refreshing. This book talks about, pleasure, lust, love, sex, drugs, rock and roll, the whole thing. It's a really good collection. Finn is a buddy of mine from Instagram, and I was really, really happy to support him. So if you're watching this, Finn, I loved it, man. Great job. This book here is Kairos by Fatula Reynolds, another poetry collection. Fatula is someone who I have interacted with quite a bit online. She's a poet from Melbourne as well. We've never actually met in person, but I imagine someday that could happen. And she writes with this really nostalgic voice. She's remembering things that have happened in the past in a really beautiful and endearing way. One theme that kept repeating throughout this book was nature. There were a lot of poems about nature in this book, which I really like because I like nature. There was also a lot of poems about loss. Fatula Reynolds is a Greek-Australian author, and so this book was full of, allusions to Greek heritage and growing up in a European-Australian family, and I really resonated with it. My copy was signed by Fatula, which I think is really special, so thank you, Fatula. This book here is Beach Drunk by Josh Goulart, which I thought was a really interesting book. It's quite short. I think I only read it in one train ride, really, and then I sort of looked over it again the next day. And I was quite fascinated by it. Some of the themes were, like adolescence or growing up, being a young man. Some of the poems are about reading, about coffee. There are some references to the Beat Generation in there, which I really liked. I thought that was really cool. And the only thing is, I wish the book was a little bit longer. So thanks, Josh. I really enjoyed it. This book here, it's quite a big book. It's 313 pages, I think. So this book is Kaleidoscopes of Colour 2 by Robert Cossey. Robert is another one of my poetry buddies from Instagram. He's really supportive of my poetry, and I try to be really supportive of his as well. So I bought his book, and I really enjoyed it. A lot of the poems in this book are about unrequited love, and nostalgia, and lust, and memory, heartbreak, and emotions, and wandering through cities. I really enjoyed it. I think it was a good read. It was nice and chunky. I really got a sense of Robert Cossey's voice and his life, and I'm really excited to read more of his work. I know he's currently working on something now. This book here was a really fun one. It's actually a play, so it's written quite literally as a play to be performed in a theatre. Howard Firkin is an Australian writer who I met last year at the Clunes Booktown Festival. I bought his book, which is apparently only one of a few copies ever published, but this play was so delightful. It's about a woman, Granny Beggett, who is an alcoholic, but supposedly not an alcoholic, and she has her license taken from her, and so she has two men build her a chair that she can be carried around the town. A town which is struggling financially and economically, with a mayor who is a bit of an asshole, a bit of a dick. Especially to Granny Beggett. He's after her money because, you see, she's won the lottery, and he wants the money for the town, but Granny Beggett's not having a word of it. This play does end in a tragedy, which shocked me, but the humour was wonderful, and I would love to see this performed on a stage someday. So that was a delight to read. And this is the thing with independent books. Sometimes you just find these real delights and you really don't expect it. I will be honest, I didn't have too many expectations for this play. I don't really read plays all that often, and yet I think it was perhaps my favourite book in February. And the last book that I'm going to talk about is Deeper Than the Ocean by Emma Rose. Now, this book here I had bought a while ago and had been hesitant to read because it is about Emma's breakup with Lil Peep, who is one of my favourite emo rappers, and also about his death in 2017. So this is about how she coped with the death and the breakup and her emotions and so on. So it's a very sad book, which is, you know, pretty on brand for the whole emo rap thing. And as an experienced sad boy myself, I thought it would be worth me reading to learn a little bit more about Lil Peep and his relationship with Emma, and of course to learn a bit about Emma, who I didn't know all that much about. I really enjoyed the book, apart from the glaring spelling errors and typos. It was full of them, but I actually think that sort of made the book feel a little more raw. You could sort of tell that this was published in a bit of a hurry, but I'm not bothered by that because it's raw emotion, it's all real, it's all heartbreaking, devastating, really sad to read, really tough to read. At times I had to actually put this down because it was a lot, but I don't regret reading it, and I enjoyed it, and I resonated with it really hard, and I'm glad that I did. So overall, I think I had a really good month for reading. I only read independent authors, I stuck to my challenge, I didn't stray at all from the task at hand, I read all of the independent books. I think I got through a sizable amount of the independent books in my collection, so I'm really glad about that. So my call to action for you is to support independent authors, buy their books, read their books, review their books, and even share their books with your friends. It does more help than you could ever know, and you might be surprised. You could find some really interesting delights, like Granny Beggett's chair. So that's all from me. Have a great week, and I'll see you in another video. To support my writing, follow me on Instagram at Jaden Poetry, and consider subscribing to this channel.